So Zuffa Boxing '01 went live on Paramount Plus over the weekend. Yeah, I think people know I've been very skeptical of their foray into the sport. So I tuned in. I'll give my initial thoughts. I tuned in, and early on, Robert Merriweather. I missed the Troy Nash fight. I've covered Robert Merriweather since he was a 15-year-old at Floyd Mayweather's gym. Got a soft spot for Robert. Think he's a really good prospect, or at least a good prospect, right? And his fight was very entertaining. And he it looked like he was going to stop him. He knocked the guy's mouthpiece out in the second round, and then he tapers off a little bit. It goes the distance, strong showing. And Emiliano Cardenas out of the Robert Garcia gym had a good showing. And throughout the card, it was good, competitive pro box style matchmaking. There was solid young talent on this card and good action throughout. But I felt right away, I'm like, all right, it's boxing and good action, and I like Robert. And then slowly the broadcast, particularly from Max Kellerman and Joe Tessitore, descended into sell, 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 sell. And I was like, if you were to play a Zuffa Boxing drinking game where you had to take a shot every single time they tried to give you the hard sell on Zuffa Boxing being the savior and the greatest thing ever, you'd actually die. You wouldn't be piss drunk. You'd probably die of alcohol disease in one given night. And I felt as the night went on, and I'll let you cook in a moment, that the soulless dystopianness of it all began to take hold because, that's what this really is. This doesn't feel like a company's genuine venture into the sport of boxing to compete with other. It felt like another chip in the quest for world domination of TKO and some of their partners like Silver Lake. That's what it felt like as I saw Ari Emanuel fidget around and not be able to stand still for 5 minutes ringside. It just had the broadcast devolved into pure selling. Max Kellerman gave us I've been waiting my whole life for this, and there's a they in the NFL. There's a they in the NBA. We finally have a they. It's like you've given this speech like 7 times over the last 5 months, Max. But anyways, that was some of my first opening thoughts. What did you think of everything, Raheem?
It was the opening episode of a reality series. The reason that you feel the way you feel is because they were selling something that isn't real yet. This has nothing to do with the talent of the fighters, which isn't top tier, but they are quality fighters.
Yep.
Make no mistake, these were not shit fighters, even for those who may not know their names. What we did have, though, was something that really should have highlighted the matchups. I do see in what we call small hall shows and even solid undercards when they're built properly that matchmaking can make up for star making and replace star making, which I would prefer over star making. Well, what they're doing is trying to make you feel something that isn't present yet. Max is telegraphing what they're selling. Like, this is amazing. You don't understand what you're watching yet. This is what I've been waiting my whole life for. Max Kellerman hasn't been waiting his whole life to call that card. He has been waiting his whole life, maybe, to be in a position to be the voice of someone who controls boxing as a single entity. He wants to be in the Iron Throne. He wants to be able to control the sport top to bottom and be able to dictate the narrative of the entire sport of boxing. By the way, that will never happen. But what will happen, most likely, is they will create a universe unto which, at some point, they will only answer to themselves. This is what a reality show is. They are selling this off the back of a narrative. And the matchups really should be front and center, but like we said in the trailer, it's their vision that's front and center. Sit back, guys, and let the boxers do the work. Let the fight do the work. Let the fighters draw the crowd in. Stop telling us and just show us. This was your first show. And they treated it like their thousandth tell.
I think they're called the MMA draw or the fight draw, but they explain and they're smarter than me at articulating what it is I've been talking about for the last year or two. And they're doing Moneyball in the short term, and in the long term, it's more letting the former regime of promoters bleed out, and they're help doing that to themselves with their short term um, relationships with Turkey Al Sheikh, and as each of their Golden Boys network deal is on the outs with DAZN right now. Maybe they wind up coming back into the fold. I talked to some people over the weekend. DAZN still wants Boots versus Ortiz. If Oscar, maybe they even give Oscar his extension that he reportedly in the lawsuit turned down just to get that fight over the finish line, because then it doesn't give Ortiz the out he wants in his contract, where if he's not with the zone and then Top Rank doesn't have a network next week for Xander and Abes Barral, PBC, their top star is, I don't know, on the run or not going to jail when jail is beckoning for him. And Benavides, meanwhile, they have after Zurdo Ramirez, which is a good fight, by the way. They don't have a whole lot of opponents for him, and in the division he's fighting in, the best opponent when he's done with Zurdo is over here at Zufa. So that's it's not that they're coming in and, like Dana said after the fight, he goes, "When did I ever fucking say that I was gonna crush everybody?" And it's like 3 days ago on Bloomberg, right before your first card, and your financier slash sugar daddy said it at your first ever press conference announcing this exact league that you're holding a post fight at. But whatever, difference aside, these fights aren't in terms of top end talent all that, because they're gonna tread water a little bit with good young talent until they and middling guys or contenders until the other shoe drops on their competitors. And then especially if they get this play done with USA Boxing where they're able to get funneled all the top amateurs, then they can start to have all the top end talent over the long term. So that's the play here. But I will say, to give them credit, I know a lot of guys like Julian Rodriguez, who had a really entertaining fight with Kane Sandoval. He got a bunch of bonuses. There's a lot of guys like a Julian Rodriguez, like a Robert Merriweather, getting their career high paydays. And so for there's going to be a lot of those type of guys where it makes sense. But then at the same time, you've seen Justin Gaethje beat the guy they want. I don't watch UFC, but it was funny, right? As they are starting their $1.1 billion annual deal, he's saying, 14 bonuses, and I still haven't even made $1 million. So there would appear, judging by their history, to be a ceiling there. But hey, I'm more about not liking the world domination using boxing as a chip than I am being a bleeding heart for fighter pay. But I want to give credit where it's due. There was a lot of guys on that card who made more money they ever did fighting with a top rank.
When he says he's going to crush everybody, I think he had probably just walked out of a WWE meeting because the model I believe that Dana White has in his head is very much identical to the model that brought, I guess at the time, the WWF on,
Mm-hmm.
and how Vince McMahon took away all of these territorial wrestling outfits on their television deals and centralized everything. Doesn't mean that even then that the WWF necessarily had the best show in town, but they had the best narrative in town, and they were driving their talent globally, or at least nationwide at the time. And now this is a global play for what I believe is a narrative that they are looking to promote and maintain. And the fighters will be somewhat interchangeable based on performance and fan favoritism, which to me also is very similar to a WWE model. Like in the sense that I know you like to eat what you kill, that adage, the fighters will have to do this inside that system. What he may be able to do, and by he I mean the entirety of this, conglomerate that puts together what we will be calling Zufa, is providing an alternative universe to the boxing world that we're all accustomed, which is again what this legislation brings in. To be fair to them, as we've said before, it's not destroying the Ali Act. It's giving an alternative. It's giving an out for people who don't want to fight under the Muhammad Ali Act. Well, this, I believe, is giving an out to the fan who doesn't want to participate in the four belt system and all the shenanigans that we've seen in boxing promotion to date. I don't, however, believe that what they're presenting is going to be significantly attractive enough that we just forget about everything outside this system. In fact, boxing at the end of the day seems to always win out. Boxing is going to be boxing. They couldn't bring their maiden voyage forward without playing by the existing boxing rules. Otherwise, they'd still be sitting on the sidelines talking about what they're going to do and having done nothing. So to get in the game, they got to play by the existing rules. The biggest news that they made was signing a fighter who's a world champion looking to unify and become undisputed. In his first voicing of his association with Zufa, said that that was his goal, and they're going to facilitate that. So this out of the window, four belt era, all this stuff, well, apparently that doesn't apply to the beginning. It doesn't apply to the foundation. It doesn't apply to your first big signing, and likely the first big show that you actually put on yourselves without being the facilitator for the Turkey Al Sheikh Real system and just, running the show, but not owning the show. The first show you own is going to probably be a unification with McKillian and Opataya for exactly what we would see in any other promotion anywhere else in the boxing world that has that fighter. That lets you know that this world of boxing is not so easily replaced by some other system that you imagine. You're going to have to work your way into this thing and slowly, maybe gradually, offer new elements. I didn't see anything different about the ring. It's not an octagon. There's no cage around it. The ring's not smaller. They're not using smaller gloves. There's nothing different about what I saw there other than what I think they're laying the groundwork for. And to your point, being a little heavy-handed about it. Stop telling us and just start showing us. If we take everything that they told us out of the equation and just looked at what they showed us, well, what I saw was a small hall fight. Something I might see at York Hall, or I might have seen at StubHub years ago, or something that you could see anywhere in the country by any kind of actual mid-level promoter that's got a good matchmaker. That's all we saw on Friday night. And there's nothing wrong with that. And maybe that is something they have to accept. There's a lot of things wrong with boxing, but it ain't that. That's still good stuff. That's what they showed us. Until they show us something else, I'm not any longer really willing to play the imaginary fantasy boxing league. It doesn't exist. Let's see what happens when the actual changes are in place. Because right now, Zufa is just a small hall promoter that's putting on some good matches.
Yeah, and by the way, I just wanted to amend myself from earlier. The name of the Twitter page that does it is the MMA Draw, but it's a guy that goes by Fight Opinion, and he's done some brilliant work on this, Raheem. And I'll even send you some articles your way. Very big colleague of ours who was ringside at the Metapex Apex Center called it a glorified club show when I asked him what it was like to cover it. To your point, right? And in promote, not only are they immediately promoting backstage Opataya Mikhailian, an IBF WBC unification, but Dana, in promoting this fight, said Okapo's only lost in title fights. It's like, which titles are you talking about, Dana? Which the ones that aren't relevant anymore and are gonna it only makes sense for the zoo. I mean, I get it though. You have to play ball a little bit in the beginning and eventually funnel it into your system and have your one Zuffa belt. I get it. I understand that. One thing though, my wife did remind me, aren't first impressions everything? They're actually not, but that's an old adage for a reason. And I think their first impression was underwhelming. I think even people who are gung-ho on Zuffa kind of agree with that. Now, I'm smart enough to know that, first of all, first impressions aren't everything. And then also sustainability matters. So Al Heyman PBC may have had a better first impression. They went out and got, Al Michaels and Sugar Ray Leonard, couldn't pay for him much long term, couldn't afford those time buys very long and all that, and eventually wound up doing a bulk of their programming where they started anyways on Showtime. But their first offering was a better card. It had Keith Thurman against Robert Guerrero, a champion, a legit championship level fight at the time. And I got this in my notes. What I think is funny is there's a cadre of people on Twitter, fans and journalists alike, colleagues of ours, plenty of whom I respect, who have called people PBC unpaid interns. And what's the irony is now they are the Zuffa Boxing unpaid interns, unless of course they're partnered with Zuffa's sugar daddy, Turkey Al Sheikh, in which case they are paid Zuffa Boxing shills. So hashtag paid Zuffa Boxing shills or hashtag unpaid Zuffa Boxing interns. But what I think is funny is there's a few of them saying they're mocking the quote pseudo activism and false virtue signaling of people going up against Zuffa Boxing and TKO and the concerns many of us have said, right, in our own media spaces. And I would say, when PBC started, because there's a lot of fairly pointing out, well, people like PBC brought us to this point where Zuffa could make this kind of play. People like Eddie Hearn with the Zone and his $1 billion that we were both at on a rooftop in Manhattan brought us here. The beginning of inflating and pumping the market and throwing the market out of whack, making fighters want unrealistic purses that they're not actually worth and all that. But that's all been covered. That's when those two made their venture into the sport, they were met with skepticism. All right. I don't look at the people who were talking about and forecasting the potential harms those business models and those forays into the sport as performative activism or pseudo activism. I looked at it as that was their perspective of speaking truth to power. And so I would say that's the same thing that's going on now for Zuffa. It's the same kind of thing that they did back then. And so to me, their hypocrisy is quite something, but we can all be hypocrites sometimes. We've all been hypocrites at different points in our lives, but nobody quite takes the hypocrite cake like Dana White doing Dodge commercials talking about America and bald eagles, and then having Riyadh season all over his ring at a time where, the Saudi government is in federal court for being implicated in 9/11. That takes the hypocrisy cake from Mr. Dana White.
Well, Sean, I have to go back to this point because I don't want it to get lost in the mire of all the media criticizing media, reflecting on who said what and who stopped what from whom doing when. Like all these, this is all inside baseball, right?
Yeah,
Like these are
yeah,
the
yeah. No
things
one
that we
cares
get on the
about.
phone and talk about at 4 a.m. It's the things that we, sit quietly at ringside and whisper as the fights are going on as to what we might say in the review sometime later in the night. But this sport is for the fans primarily, and we hope to voice the fans' perspective. From a fan perspective, we saw nothing different. And what we've been sold and told for months now is that Zufa was going to bring something revolutionary. What we were hearing Max Kellerman repeat ad nauseum is how he's been waiting his whole life for this moment to call a small hall boxing match. That's what you've been waiting your whole life to do? Because I've seen you do much bigger things on huge stages with far more significance. I can't imagine that this card put on this way is what your life's ambition has been, and you feel like you just arrived at that. I'm being a little sarcastic because I think it's important to recognize that now we just have to judge them on what they do. I saw an entertaining small hall. I keep saying small hall because now I spend so much of my time over on the other side of the pond, but what we might say in America, a club show. There is nothing wrong with club shows. In fact, I respect that more if that's Dana White's maiden voyage into boxing, which really is what he's been waiting his lifetime to do. That's the traditional way of entering it. That's a more humble
Feasible.
way,
Yeah.
a more authentic, traditional way to get into big time promoting. If you can make your bones in the club show, if you can match make and entertain the fans with fighters whose names they don't know, if you can turn fans into fighters who you say have the talent to capture their imagination and make them fans of these guys who already had careers that nobody picked up, already have turned pro and gotten their sea legs and are providing themselves a career that are making them enough money to pay rent, but not really stars and not really getting the big bucks. But you say, I see something in this guy, or this matchup is going to be super entertaining. I could turn this into something that fans will talk about on Sunday morning and deliver that. That's way more impressive than changing all the laws and changing the size, the dynamic of the ring and making all these so-called fixes so you can stack the deck and create something other than what we're accustomed to seeing. This is in a way an impressive start for what it actually is. Stop creating this other standard of what we're supposed to be experiencing and what you're promising if that's not what's on the table. We will judge you by what is in front of us. And what was in front of us on Friday night was a very good, well-matched small hall or club level fight show. They're going to do two more of the same ilk. I think the broadcasters need to embrace that. The executives need to stop promising other than that. Embrace the fact that you're coming in a way that we can actually all respect and tip your hat to the game. Be like, oh yeah, this is how boxing is done. We can do something that gives us legit credibility on the same playing field that every other promoter has had to do it. I will bring to you entertainment on a Friday or a Saturday night out of existing boxers who maybe have been overlooked by other promoters and show you how to make matchups. That is a mic drop. That is a flex.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they need to be bragging about.
No, great point. And Rayo Valenzuela, Diego Torres is going to be a good toss up. The day after Shakur Tiafimo. So no, it's a good point. Look, if they can't achieve their aspirations of monopolizing boxing and making it 1/3 of this combat sports, monopoly of WWE, MMA, and boxing, well, they would just be the latest to aim high and to fail. PBC wanted to put boxing back on free network television like back in the 80s. Didn't happen. DAZN and Eddie Hearn wanted to become, by far the biggest game in town and kill pay-per-view. Didn't happen. Turkey said no more pay-per-views. Not happening. They want to monopolize boxing, and hopefully that's not actually happening and more in line with you. And again, this would be a more sustainable entry into, you're right, that would be smart. It's instead of going after just every talent and we're going to take over the entire game because they're not the first to try it and hopefully won't be the last, then yeah, I think you just, pulled out a great point. Last point about the show itself. Callum Walsh is not Roy Jones, but at least I predicted him to win the fight. So I am 1-0 on Zuffa Boxing main events. And again, the Rodriguez Sandoval fight was really good in terms of action, and Sandoval has ridiculous punch resistance. He was absorbing shots like he's Majin Buu. I know you're too civilized to understand that reference, but people my age and younger will maybe like it. But there was a bit of a monotonous, as good as the action was, a monotony. I felt guys were fighting in the pocket a lot, and I know on paper and in theory that's what people want to see. But I know Dana has a history of telling guys in MMA, hey, we don't really want you wrestling on the ground much. And that hasn't prevented, again, I don't watch this stuff, but it hasn't prevented great wrestlers like George St. Pierre or Habib Nurmagomedov from doing what they do and becoming stars. But I know he has incentivized, and maybe not incentivized, but told his guys, we want you to stand up more than we want you on the ground, right? And this broadcast had like an aggression percentage, which is a little innovative. It's not a horrible idea, but it did make me wonder, like, is everyone fighting in the pocket this much, fight after fight after fight, at the very least, because there's a fight of the night bonus and that kind of thing? Or, at the worst, because they got a talking to. No Tom and Jerry fights, like Turkey said. And they're being told this is part of the deal. We want action. And that makes fights that, or I think real boxing purists are used to there being some boring fights. And like last night at Raymond Murataya's fight against Andy Cruz, co-main event sucked. One guy blew weight. The other fighter, Jesse Hart, probably got robbed. He held on as the fight went on. He gassed out. Khalil Cole was barely throwing punches, but that only makes the main event that much sweeter. That got you in to the house anyways. And I just didn't see a lot of feigning, taking a walk, slowing the fight down, using your jab a lot. It was a lot of in the pocket, in the pocket. And if every fight's going to look like that, it takes away from the fights that organically happen that way to me. You know, real baseball purists, they'll put up with a 1-0 game. And then that makes them enjoy the 10-7 game. Or you know, football purists too, basketball purists too. If you're constantly scoring, if you're doing everything you can to promote scoring, it makes it a little bit watered down. People have talked about that in the other major sports. Go ahead.
Of course, what you're saying is true for the real hard and fast pugilist, either scientist or observer. However, I can guarantee you that that is not what they are selling.
Right.
They are not selling purist boxing. They are not even selling pugilism. What does Dana White famously say? They are selling oh fuck moments. They have I'm going to be as generous as I can and give them all the best of intentions. I'm going to say that it wasn't some talking to in the back room. I'm going to say it's matchmaking. I'm going to say that they found two guys who would fight in the pocket.
Mm-hmm.
They also have found a card full of guys who clearly didn't make it on the big promoters and in the beaten path thus far. They weren't the pick. They weren't the guys who got ushered through and headed straight to world championships. Or they were and fell off that path and are now looking to make a name for themselves. So that's a certain style of boxing that's entertainment oriented, and the fighters have a certain desperation to make themselves stars, that this might be their last chance to be a star. This might be their last chance to live that dream. And if they're already off the traditional path of the seven belt environment, and now that there's this new entity being promised, not delivered yet, they want to be the guys that that new machine depends on. So they're going to fight in the pocket because they know that that's how you make yourself an overnight star. They want to get that knockout, being in the first round or the last minute of the last round. They want to be the highlight. And they are, and by they, I mean the Zuffa matchmakers are putting guys together who have that motivation and probably don't have the skill set that you're talking about on purpose. I don't think they're signing technicians or guys with great outside footwork who fight off the back foot and win a 10-round decision on jabs. That's not what they're looking for. And there's a place for that in the sport. No problem with that. That's great. And you will find stars there and you will be entertained there. And what's likely to happen is if they continue to put fights like this on, I don't think it is diminishing returns. I think you do get something like what you eventually got in the UFC, which is a fight night where everybody shows up knowing it's going to be a ton of action and not necessarily being bought in on the name of the fighter or having to know whether or not this guy was a world champion. It doesn't matter if you've lost 5 or 6 fights, as long as you're putting on some real beer guzzling, get out of your seat and cheer type of entertainment, you're all good. If you want to look at the main event for the UFC, which was also as important, if not maybe more important for the UFC, a premiere of their new platform, that fight was almost 100% striking. There was very little action on the ground. I don't cover UFC either, but I watched it because I wanted to see how they were coming on to this Paramount Plus platform and how this would look against everything else on the weekend, which was a ton of combat action. They put in there, which is as close to a boxing match as you could possibly see in a mixed martial arts fight. There was kicking, there was elbows, there was some holding and some taken to the ground, but ultimately, Gaethje was all hands. And he beat this other guy, Pimbleton, if I'm pronouncing his name right. Again,
Paddy Pimblett.
Pimblett, I'm not a UFC commentator coverage at all, but like I say, I watched it and I've seen him before. And he was kicking and but it was all striking. And he got beat by a guy who was almost exclusively punching. They put on their closest that they could to a boxing match. And that was the best thing I was watching because I was like, oh man, I really don't think a boxer is going to be able to beat a mixed martial artist with all the tools a mixed martial artist has at his disposal if a guy is just using his hands. Gaethje ain't no boxer, but he was boxing. And that was by far the most entertaining fight you were going to get on that card that night simply because of the way it was fought. Now, I remember when UFC spent a lot of time with grappling on the ground. I remember when the entertainment value started to dip a little bit for me being like a massive casual in MMA and going to bars to watch the fights and wanting those oh fuck moments and wanting to see the action and not caring about who these guys were or how many times they had lost, just about entertain on the night. Once they started with a bunch of grappling, bunch of, submissions, even the submissions are exciting, but they take a long time to get to. The excitement started to dip. And that's when those backroom conversations, I believe, were had in the UFC to tell these guys, this is a stand-up game now. We're not going to put up with, 20 minutes of grappling, and we're going to have to keep this thing exciting. In boxing, you can do that with matchmaking because you know who has those skill sets and you know who not to match them up with, especially if there are no mandatories, if there is no system in place where you have to fight one guy against another, if there's no benefit to a fighter in fighting that style. That's what we're seeing in Zufa. That's what I think made the UFC a great bar fight, a great bar night to watch the fights. That's what they're relying on in Zufa. And I cannot stress this enough. If you are one of these boxing purists who want to thumb your nose at MMA, go watch the main event of the UFC on Paramount Plus because you will have to admit you were wildly entertained and you will put a smile on your face because you're basically entertained by a boxing bar brawl. Like you saw a guy in there beating up a dude who was using all of his MMA tools and was getting bested by a puncher.
Yeah, the kind of matchmaking you're talking about is how DeBella and After Dark made Gotti Ward. It wasn't like either guy was at that point. Gotti wound up winning another title against Gianluca Bronco. Forget about it because Costa Tszyu vacated anyways. Not to get into the weeds of my boxing story and this, but yeah, that's how they produced Gotti Ward. It was with the kind of matchmaking. That's why they put that fight on. They didn't think either guy was a top 5 super lightweight. They did that, and they made magic happen with that. The kids call that now though. Sometimes when it's just pure entertainment for the sake of entertainment, they call it slop. But hey, I like slops. I like guinea slop, and every now and then I go to an Italian restaurant, eat my guinea slop. But so to be fair, but
listen, it's not slop, man.
no, I know.
Sometimes you want a really 5-course delicate meal where
Not
the
every night.
portions are small and the taste
Yeah.
is explosive and you only have 2 bites of everything. But I'll tell you what, more times than not, you got a taste for is a good, juicy cheeseburger with no real nutritional value that is going to be delicious for a little while and probably you'll feel guilty about afterwards. That is a sustainable bar food diet. And that's what Dana White has been serving his whole combat promoter career.
That I feel caught. That's exactly what I ate was 2 sloppy hamburgers last night, and I do regret it right now as I sit down and my stomach hurts after Morataya Cruz. Well, I'll close. One thing that what's interesting about your point, right, is Conor McGregor was a striker, and Rousey got beat by a striker, and you're saying last night the guy they wanted to win, Paddy Pimblett, because people keep saying they're struggling to produce stars, even though they got this huge check from Paramount. They wanted Pimblett to win. He wasn't even ranked really to fight for a championship. He lost to the version of boxing, right? And I almost think that's another reason why they want the sport now under their wing is because look at the migration of their top journalists. Luke Thomas and Ariel Helwani and well, Brian Campbell been in the game a minute. Shout out to Brian Campbell too. Shout out to all three of those guys. Um, but Luke and Ariel, for example, two of the most influential voices in that space, were migrating to boxing. Ariel's been talking about boxing the last couple of years more than he ever had in 10 years before. He struck me as more of, about that action for MMA. Like MMA, he was more on Dana's page. Like, this is the evolution of fighting. And you old heads and you guys that are still holding on to boxing, you're getting washed out by this new evolved advanced form of ultimate fighting where you have all the weapons and you're not just limited to your fists and all this. And look at him. The man fell in love with the sport
Yeah.
after having a falling out with Dana White. Luke Thomas too. I got mad love for Luke Thomas. That's my guy. You were falling in love with, you're an MMA purist, brother. Like, I'm a boxing purist, but you were falling in love with that sweet science. Don't lie to him. And he wouldn't. And then their fighters were Francis Ngannou. I need that boxing bag. Sean O'Malley at the peak of his powers was like, I want to fight Gervonta Davis. I don't even care. I'll fuck him up in a real fight, is how he felt. But I don't care if I get destroyed in a boxing match because I want that boxing money. So they said, we got to do something about this over here. This little cockamamie crew up the block, they take for, every now and then they're getting big numbers, and we got to take. So I think that's a part of their foray too. Is how does this fucking horribly ran dysfunctional crew up the block every now and then make us look bad? Gets more customers than we do. How do they do it, man? Call up our boys in Congress. We're gonna put an end to this shit. That's what I think this is a part of too. It's not just, man, we really love boxing and we really want to, make everything better and make boxing great again and all that stuff. I think that plays a role in it too, Raheem. Oh, and by the way, I did a live on this. I gave it the college try. Maybe, and people will say, well, you're just being a wuss. You're just being a crybaby. I halfway through, I was telling my live, I don't know if I could do this. Just something about the essence of what I was watching and feeling. And in my opinion, it even took hold in that arena because Kellerman and Ward, who I both have tremendous respect for, and again, the shilling was really done by Max and Tessitore, not so much Andre. Andre, the points he was pointing out were a lot more fair for the fighters. And Andre's always going to speak from the perspective of fighters. But I even felt they came out hot. Max early in the broadcast is saying, hey, when you're able to land your backhand, your right hand, if you're an orthodox, from long mid-range to long range, that's a very good sign that you're a talented fighter because it requires a certain level of athleticism and speed to get that kind of shot off and lead with it at that kind of distance. Oh, okay, Max is still that man. He's dropping gems. But then it slowly, the air out of the balloon began to come out. And in my opinion, it's a spiritual thing. It's because that there's something rotten about how this has been put together by the people putting it together. So it was hard for me to get through the card at some point. It was. I don't
Sean,
know how I'm going to even cover this stuff.
you were watching guys who are used to giving Michelin stars trying to fit those reviews in where really all that's necessary is a Yelp review. This is the problem. They're going to have to adjust their commentary to the product. The reason there's the distance between what you were experiencing from the broadcast and what you were watching, and you couldn't reconcile the two, is because everyone's going to have to accept what's being served. And I don't see, again, anything wrong with that, but I'd be more entertained by with Snoop on Triller type of commentary. Like, let's just talk about the distance and this is a talented fighter. If you can fight, no, these guys are in the pocket for a reason. Let's just call this thing like a bar brawl, like we're on World Star. If you want to bring some more entertainment to the thing, stop playing, stop pretending. I tell you what, when you give us what you promised, whatever this Zufa thing is going to be sometime down the road, then you commentate it like that. But this is not that. This is not the refined art of pugilism per se. This is a really good scrap. Call it that way. Stop pretending like it already is what you're promising and just enjoy what you're actually delivering, which I thought was entertaining enough. That's it. That would have made for a much more entertaining broadcast. That's all you gotta do. If I order a burger, man, I want to hear it through a squawk box. I don't want you coming over in your tuxedo with a handkerchief over your arm.
Well, that's a good one. Yeah. All right. Yeah. I mean, it's because Raheem, when Triller was doing that, they were just idiots flushing money down a table in an inevitably failed venture in boxing. Whereas, again, this is a chip towards like world domination. That's why it felt. If when I was watching Jake Paul knock out Nate Robinson on the undercard, I was kind of like, ew, this is stupid. But again, that was just idiots who didn't know, like flushing money down the toilet trying to get into boxing. The reason why it was hard for me to get through and it felt wrong in my stomach is like I started this whole video with it's a chip towards like world domination, not for Andre or Max or for Joe or the fighters, for the people actually owning this company. So and a lot of people do not give a shit about that. As long as
That
the
is
hands
not
are being thrown, I understand that, and
that
that's
is not flushing money down the toilet, Sean. That is Jake Paul knowing exactly the product he's delivering and offering it up in the way that it is meant to be consumed. He has nothing but influencers broadcasting his show. They are making more money than any boxing promoter or certainly any MMA show on Netflix, the first to put it on there. They are making tons and tons and tons of views, and they are delivering a product. I'm glad you brought that up because they're delivering a product on exactly the platter that you expect that kind of meal to be served on, and they're doing it in the style that is the most low-hanging, attainable fruit possible. That is the formula. Zufa needs to figure out what its identity is and start selling us the same thing that they're telling us.
well, I was talking about Triller, not MVP, not what MVP has gone on with Jake Paul. I was talking about the short-lived Triller. That
Ah,
yeah.
Snoop still had the best
Oh,
broadcast
he was great.
of
He
this
was
crossover
great.
boxing to date.
I was talking about the people running the show. He did his part beautifully. Shout out to Snoop.